Welcome to this LinkedIn live event, Scaling Investment Advice, AI Banking and the Future of Client Service, hosted by Marvin Labs. I'm James Yerkes, former HSBC Global Head of Wealth and FX, and I'm joined by Alex Hoffman, co-founder and CEO of Marvin Labs, and John Goddard, a former COO and banking expert in HSBC. Before I ask them to introduce themselves and their backgrounds, here's a quick overview of what we will be discussing today. With mounting cost pressures in banking, how can institutions ensure that every client receives high quality investment advice when thousands of advisors speak to clients daily? As a team, we'll dig into how AI is transforming investment research and scaling high quality advice. The challenge of maintaining personalized client service amidst cost-cutting pressures will also be explored, and the implications of cutting-edge AI models and new developments in DeepSeek regarding inference cost whilst expanding accessibility. You can ask questions by writing them in the comments box. We will then be able to see them and answer them for you. And finally, if you haven't had a look yet, Marvin Labs, a one-stop destination for qualitative and quantitative insights from earnings reports. Also, new in Private Alpha is a new feature that lets you upload broker reports and instantly see key areas of consensus and disagreement between different analysts. So over to you, John Goddard, if you'd like to introduce yourself and your background.
Thanks, James. Hi, Alex. Lovely to be here and really appreciate the invitation. So John Goddard, I've been 3 decades now in financial services. I've worked all over the world, but mainly across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. Done lots of different jobs over those years, from frontline to back office. And most recently, I was the global COO of the private banking and wealth business at HSBC. Pleasure to be here.
Great, John. I'm sure you've got lots of bang up-to-date insights from the world of banking. And Alex Hoffman, if you'd like to introduce yourself, co-founder and CEO of Marvin Labs.
Yeah, hi, James. Hi, John. I'm Alex. I'm as James said, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Marvin Labs. I spent a good chunk of my career in financial services, both on the investment banking side, where I used to be involved in Credit Suisse's credit trading and structuring business, and on the hedge fund side, where I invested kind of across the credit and equity spectrum, mostly focused on corporates. And as of summer last year, I founded Marvin Labs, which is my second startup. As James said, we are building an AI co-pilot for professional investors. And as part of what we're doing, we're thinking about things such as how do you scale high quality investment advice without kind of, pardon the pun, but without breaking the bank.
I like that pun. That's a good one to start with. Just on that then, so John, actually, let's come to you first of all on this discussion that Alex mentioned around, the cost versus quality dilemma, and you have been right at the forefront of some of these challenges and discussions, particularly around how can banks and financial institutions balance the cost-cutting measures that are always in place with maintaining high-quality investment advice for clients.
Yeah, thanks, James. It's a really topical conversation. I think we've just been through, the results round for most of the financial services industry in the last few weeks, and pretty much without fail, those FIs have been talking to the market about their cost efficiency programs and their transformation programs. So it's really top of mind for a lot of organizations right now about how can they manage their cost base more effectively and be more efficient, because that goes obviously straight to the bottom line. But of course, the key issue then is how do you do that and still be able to offer the best possible service to your clients? And that's what they're all grappling with at the moment. I'd say, in my experience, the first thing to say is that the biggest cost pool by far is headcount, is the people within the organization, particularly as you get into the wealth and private banking space. So managing that headcount is critical. And you'll find that these organizations are very focused on how they can do that. So if you think through the the different cost pools that they're managing. They're looking at their organizational design. They're looking at how they can maximize the efficiency of the headcount that they have so that they can reduce hiring. They're looking at how they can ensure that the proportion of their headcount that is revenue generating, that's client focused, is maximized as much as possible. And then they're also looking at some of the other sort of more traditional targets when it comes to costs. You know, they're focused on their marketing spend. They're focused on their travel and entertainment budgets. So the key really, when you're looking at this as a business, is how can you maximize the efficiency of the business without impacting your ability to service clients and without impacting your ability to drive improved revenue, because obviously that would be self-defeating. So I think what you'll find is that a lot of these organizations are looking at making clear savings so that they can then reinvest in the business, reinvest in technology, reinvest in digital, reinvest in data, and of course reinvest in AI. And if you can do that effectively, then you're in a virtuous circle where you can save cost and be more efficient while improving the service that you're giving to clients. And that's the holy grail, if you like.
Oh, that's a good intro and a good holy grail. Alex, to pass the holy grail cup to you, what's your thoughts on what John just said?
Yeah, so I mean, my background is less on the CEO side and more on the product and the structuring trading side. So kind of I have slightly less sympathy for the cost-based view than John has, which is kind of makes a lot of sense given our backgrounds. But what I always found fascinating is how banks manage quality across their organization. Because if you think about a bank as an institution, right, you have thousands of people talking to clients of various levels of skill, of various levels of background, of various levels of investment activity, of various risk profiles, and just making sure that you kind of get this done in a quality conscious way has always been fascinating to me. So I started my career on the credit new issue side, where you issue bonds, and we had a distributed sales force that covered everything from highly sophisticated professional investors all the way to what Credit Suisse used to call direct access clients. So basically, private investors that were qualified to do this, but that have vastly different levels of experience and of background, and just making sure that you have an appropriate advice product for all of them is a challenge, and it's very fascinating. So, I'm looking forward to learn a lot from John today on how he thinks about this, but also then obviously how he thinks about the cost perspective.
Definitely, and I think for me, John, just the sort of question back to you really is, I think you're right. And I myself, as a former global head in a bank, have experienced this balance between the cost cutting and maintaining quality. But for me, I've struggled so far to see in some of the banks real implementation of AI really, as part of a solution to this. It's still round the edges in terms of chat bots and pieces helping, small productivity gains, rather than in wealth management being, I haven't seen any major bank, unless you want to say I'm wrong, make a major play in the wealth management space with AI improving both productivity and quality.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the case, James, that the retail side of banking is probably further along the line with this. And let's be honest, AI isn't something new, right? In the contact center space, we've been using AI in the industry for many, many years, and customers have got used to that being the case. So it's not the case that AI is a new thing in the last year or 18 months, although it sometimes feels that way. AI has been around a long time. What's different is that AI now is much more sophisticated and can learn. And that's where, AI has therefore become a much, more important topic on everybody's lips. You're right. I think a lot of the wealth players are still in the foothills of what AI can do. And there's reasons for that. If you think about the way that banks and other financial institutions are looking at AI, they're looking at risk versus reward. They're looking at how they can get the balance right between the technology and the, if you like, the intellectual side of the proposition with the service side and the relationship side of the proposition. So there's various variables. I think what you can definitely see happening in a lot of these banks and wealth managers, there are lots of different pilots that are going on, lots of proof of concepts that haven't yet necessarily come out of the other end of the pipe so that people can see them really taking hold in the industry. But I think a lot of organizations are very much trialing the technology. I think what you'll see, and what is the case, which is why to the layperson looking in, you don't necessarily notice it's going on, is that a lot of the banks are focused on how they can make their front office more efficient in the back office, because that's lower risk and probably higher reward initially in terms of making the overall proposition more effective in front of the customer without that customer actually seeing it yet.
Which sort of throws up, I guess, this question I've got in my mind about competing legacy infrastructure investments. Do you think that's a very real challenge for banks?
Absolutely. If you think about the bank industry and how it's built up over time, the reality is that many of these banks and these financial institutions have built technology on top of technology, and their legacy systems are not particularly easy to maintain and manage and add on to in terms of new functionality. So there's a lot of focus within those types of institutions just in keeping the lights on, keeping the core systems running effectively, and that consumes quite a lot of the budget. So then, AI is then competing with other technology spend that's either really necessary just to keep the organization running effectively, or other more innovative ideas that are maybe more mainstream than AI, but perhaps have a stronger business case in the short term, and therefore are getting the investment spend when AI perhaps isn't in some cases. So it's a competition between rival programs.
Yeah, no, I get that, and I think that's interesting because one area I definitely seen AI really move forwards is in the retail bank, in the sort of fraud and KYC space, where you're seeing considerable advancements. It isn't in the wealth space going as fast as it is when you look at the introduction of fraud detection, particularly in the payment space. I think Visa have recently launched a new service that is considerably improving the number of chargebacks to people, which is having a knock-on effect positively to the cost line. So just on that note then, so Alex, just a question more to yourself about, we've talked a bit about what the problem is. To what extent is AI the solution in terms of, some of the points John's already made?
Yeah, so I think AI has, some very interesting features where it can become a solution to, as John correctly points out, right, parts of the technology stack that a bank has. I think there are a couple of quite interesting areas, and I think one of them is something that a lot of these institutions have traditionally struggled with and solved with people, which is just getting the advice product right, just getting the right kind of granularity, the right kind of frequency of market updates, of portfolio updates, of commentary done for their client base. Because if you think about it, right, it's something where, in an ideal world, in an ideal banking world, there's somebody sitting in a head office that is thinking very hard and deep about, what the market is going to do in the next 12 months and what this means as an investment application. And then, somebody else is doing that for a different investment area, and somebody else is again doing this for a different investment area. And then you have this challenge of getting this incredibly in-depth insight, which a lot of banks have, kind of federated out across the organization, getting that out to, as 5 bullet points to a private individual who, has only time to consume 5 bullet points and only needs the 5 bullet points to make the investment decision. Getting that out to the advisors, getting that out to a hedge fund client that has a completely different requirement set in terms of what they require as advice. And one of the things that banks for the longest time have employed people to do that, right? You have back office or partial front office people that do this transformation or that reinvent the wheel of taking this incredibly in-depth insight and getting that into the right product. And that is something that AI can very kind of that AI can do. I don't want to use the word easily. But that is certainly something that AI can do, and I think that's something that helps banks, just making sure that you speak with one voice, you have one kind of investment advice you're distributing out, and you're giving kind of people a tailor-made investment advice that you really don't tailor make, that AI tailor makes for you. I think that's one of the very, very interesting areas where AI can help, and where an AI 2 years ago couldn't, right? This is something that we are only getting into a position of being able to do as of the last year or so.
I think that's a very good point, particularly around, I think you make a good point there around standardization of information, particularly when you think about wealth advisory network, financial advisors. John, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think that's definitely one of the proof of concepts that a lot of the organizations are looking at right now, in terms of how you can use AI to do that standardization and put the right information quickly into the hands of the relationship managers that are dealing with the client. I think a lot of these organizations will be somewhat reticent to allow that to go straight to the client without it going through a human sign off and a human filter. But maybe at some point that will come. But definitely this point about standardization and the ability for us to have a consistency in the offering when you might have hundreds or thousands of advisors out there is, that's the holy grail in terms of what you're trying to do. That's the sweet spot. And historically, that would only be done through training programs, house view communications, research, sampling and auditing. And you're able to do that in a much more holistic manner, logically with AI. But fundamentally, I think you still want the human being at the front of that is then tailoring that to the particular needs and desires of their client, because they know the client best.
And I think there's like an interesting perspective, which I think you realize when you're looking kind of at the more high touch end of, in particular, wealth management, is that a lot of your choice, it's at least my impression, a lot of your choice on a wealth management advisor, which bank you're banking with, is less about the advice and it's more soft factors, right? It's more, do you have a good rapport? Is there kind of the right level of comfort that you're getting from your advisors? And plus, then if you're going into high touch areas, right? I mean, there comes a transactional aspect, right? If you're thinking on your ultra high net worth side, you're doing M&A transactions, you're buying assets, you're getting kind of very tailor-made loans for your yacht and your private jet. And I think that becomes a lot more important than what your view is on the stock market.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just on that point, Alex, we just had a compliment and a question, actually, which is always nice to get the two together. Yash Sharma's just said, I've used Marvin Labs and it's great. It's great as it increases productivity and analysis without going through hundreds of pages of data. It juices out every piece of information, and I would review it as top. But he also asked a question, a little bit to your point there, about is Marvin going to incorporate private company data for M&A, or is it going to remain restricted to public companies? So it might be worth just covering that one briefly in this.
Yeah, and Josh, thanks for the question and thanks for the compliment. I mean, it's always something you love to hear of happy users. So we think the model can do it, and we're kind of, James, you mentioned this earlier, right? We're venturing a bit into private-ish space with integrating brokerage reports, which are, which still cover public companies but are private documents, and we're venturing into that. The fundamental challenge. So there's a business challenge for us as a company, and there is a challenge of data acquisition in these spaces, because, I mean, quite frankly, right now, like 90% of our data is coming from the public domain. We are very careful with security, but we are not running on bank level security. So we can be a bit more relaxed about certain choices, which all of a sudden changes if you're managing and are the guardian of private data. So that's a decision we need to make, and that's also a decision where we need a counterparty that trusts us enough that they give us the data and they trust us that we are handling it right. So we're always open to somebody running a pilot project on this with us. We'd love to do that. We think the model can support it. But this is something where we need a partner to develop this with us.
Yeah, I think that's a good. And Yash says thank you for the respective compliment back. It's all on the public domain, so you can see it on this LinkedIn Live. So we're not making it up. You can actually go and see the comments for live. John, I just want to play devil's advocate with you on a point actually that you made that I think would be quite good to explore, which is, if you think for a minute more of, I'd say, the mainstream wealth advice space, not so much the private bank, but mainstream, retirement planning, etc. This constant debate about handing information out from an AI, kind of driven source, is almost like there's a reticence and a nervousness around it. But do you not think, on the flip side, it removes all the human bias that is all equally as damaging and as risky, that is trying to be removed from the process, as it were? So whilst there is concern around AI generated material, on the flip side, human bias is also a risk, and I mean that more for the more mainstream wealth support, not necessarily, as Alex said, very personalized, maybe private bank, uber high wealth, etc.
Look, I mean, clearly there is human bias, and that's also a risk. If you're trying to straitjacket the house view, and that's the only message that can be given in its entirety, then having a human in the process is always going to chip away at that potentially, or at least you can't control 100% of how that is delivered. Now, whether it's one is right and one is wrong, I'm not sure that's the answer, James. Honestly, I think we're going to quickly, if we're not already, move into a world where humans and AI are existing together and they're working hand in hand. But I think for the majority of clients, still speaking today, most of them want and expect to have a relationship manager, an investment manager, working with them to understand their needs, to understand how they feel about things. Those human emotions are really important in building a relationship, particularly when we're talking about emotive topics like the future of your retirement and your pension and whether it's in the right place. So I don't think one's right and one's wrong. I think it's going to be somewhere on that continuum that you get the right answer. I think at the moment, lots of organizations will be reticent to just fire out the AI view of the world without a human being involved. But that might change over time as people become more and more used to and trusting of the source.
Yeah, and I think it's good. I'm just going to stay with you, John, because there's a couple of questions coming actually, but this one I thought it actually goes to the heart of your point. Is the skepticism about whether AI can fully replace human-led wealth advice justified? That's from Jacob.
So look, I mean, I think I think the skepticism is less about the technical side, whether it can be done, although there's obviously, things that need to be proven around the accuracy of the AI. But over time, I think, from an intellectual perspective, you can get to a place intellectually where you say, well, the AI is going to be more effective than the human at doing that work, and it's going to become increasingly more accurate. I think the question that is in my mind is how you best deliver that and work with your client to actually get to the best result utilizing that AI. So there will be some clients that will clearly decide that they're happy with the AI and that's how they want to do their investing going forward. And there's always groups of people that are in the forefront of technology and get comfortable quicker. There'll be others that will be laggards in that respect. My gut feel is that the majority, for the time being, will be, expecting a human being to be involved in those big advisory decisions, that are about their hopes and their dreams and their aspirations for the future.
Yeah, no, and we've just had another question come in, actually. It's good. Keep the questions coming, people. Thank you for that. I think this one's a bit broader, actually. And Alex, John, feel free to jump in on this, because it's more about building on that point around, it says the question is, at the heart of wealth advice is trust. Do you see that compromised or enhanced with the increasing use of AI, and in what ways? That's a great question. It's I don't know who's asked it. It just says LinkedIn user. So whoever LinkedIn user is, thanks for asking that. But that's a great question. Who wants to take that one first?
No, I mean, so I fundamentally agree with that. Trust is everything in that relationship when it comes to giving advice. So I'm also a positively minded towards technology and how that can help that relationship between the trusted advisor and their client. So I think AI will be a positive in that, and over time, we're going to get to a position where actually advisors that aren't utilizing AI to support them in giving the right recommendations to their clients are arguably, going to be less effective than those that are. But fundamentally, as I keep saying, for me, the secret sauce here is how you adapt that to the relationship and to what qualitatively about that client. And you only get that through developing a relationship over time and building up that trust.
Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a very very true core in John's sentiment that I wholeheartedly agree with. Right, I think there are, financial services, banking in particular, is still a relationship-based industry, and I think when you separate, actually what kind of advice you're giving and from kind of who's doing that, I think then you're kind of getting into something where I think the future eventually lies, right? You will still have, in my view, a human dispensing a lot of the advice, and modulating it to a particular situation. But what you're hoping to get is that a lot of that advice that the human is dispensing is prepared and heavily guided by quality management and centralized research effort that you can only do if you are standardizing and centralizing things. And I think that's one of the beautiful things where AI comes into place, because you can do this kind of centralization, standardization of a lot more kinds of advice that you're giving, right? I mean, in particular, if you're thinking about investment decisions, but also if you think about other important decisions, I think you can do this as well. And I think what you then eventually hope to achieve I think there's a different view whether you're looking at this from the perspective of the financial institution, where I think you want to have good quality management of your advisors. And that means, a lot of their input comes from a central place where it is quality managed, where you can invest the resources to make sure that this is the best advice that you can give. But you still deliver it via a person, and that person has still the ability to modulate it. But I think if you're sitting in the bank head office, you hope that there is not a lot of modulation happening at the end level, but you still expect it, and I think that will kind of separate also a good advisor from a bad advisor by their ability to understand what they can modulate and what they can't modulate.
Yeah, I think that ties actually to another question that's come in, or more an observation for a thought, which is that along the lines of you can optimize the variables and features of a model, an AI model, which you might not have with an employee, is the question. What do you think? I think it sort of plays a little bit to what you just said there, Alex. I'm not entirely sure that you can't influence, and there will be the biases within an employee anyway. So I'm not entirely sure that's a binary kind of point either way. But what do you think on that one, John? That it's easy to adjust the variables and features of the model, is it? And with regards to person, they don't, according to the question, they don't have as much flexibility. But I'm not sure I agree with that.
Look, I mean, I guess the model is only as good as the data and the inputs that are in it. But if you're assuming that all of that is clean and accurate, then yes, logically, you can adjust the model to be free of bias in theory. But I think it's theoretical. I'm not sure that again, I'm not sure it's either or. I mean, fundamentally, I think you get good advisors and bad advisors. I think Alex said that. And some will follow the house view and some won't. And fundamentally, I'm not sure either model is going to be perfect anytime soon. So it's how you get that balance right and put the controls in place, whichever direction you go, to make sure that you're delivering the best that you can.
Yeah, and I just want to move on. Sorry, Alex, you go. Go on.
No. So I think this is actually what John just said is actually the very important point. You want to get this question right, and you want to get it right once. What you want to avoid in such an organization, in such an advice organization, is you want to avoid building a house view, and then your country organization is building a different house view that is a derivative of your initial house view, but that is then modulated by somebody that has less resources just by the nature of the setup than the central organization to build the house view. Then the branch was building another house view. Then the advisor with less resources, less training, less experience is building less access to data and less time is building another house view. So I think it's less a question of how do you what's the right mix to get this one perfect house view done. It's you just want to have one. You don't want every branch, every relationship manager to have their own view and that shining through. And I think that's what you want to avoid. And then you can solve your problem, because then you have one place where you need to solve your problem, which is somewhere in your head office or somewhere in a central location, where you could give the right kind of people that you train, that you select, that you give the right kind of resourcing and the right kind of data and the right kind of time and the right kind of support. Then you can get that right. And then it's your challenge to get that across across the organization without it being overly diluted. And I think that's the important thing if you think about it. You want to have one place where you have, where you make this house view, where you bake it. And then you want to make sure that it gets as cleanly through to your customers as possible.
We just had a comment in actually back from Melvina Metochi, if I've said that right, so hopefully I have. She said, "Thank you all for your invites. Very timely discussion. I agree that the human advice can be enhanced. So that's good. And there's another person interacting with Malvina. So we have a LinkedIn Live within a LinkedIn Live. So that's great in terms of the spirit of things. I just want to move on to a slightly different topic, or building on this, which sort of has come up. And this is this word around personalization, particularly within the wealth and the investment space. And John, again, given your time in the industry on this particular topic, how can financial institutions use AI to tailor investment advice whilst ensuring compliance and standardization? A little bit of what we've just talked about, but particularly, is AI almost like the natural evolution of the phrase robo-advisors a few years ago?
Well, that's definitely one application of AI, James, and you can see that would be a natural, evolution of that, natural next step for robo-advice. Arguably, robo-advice hasn't really taken the world by storm, though, in terms of the market share that it's achieved. So again, it kind of points out that the main area of the industry is still more traditional advice, and it's how you support that model going forward. I think that the compliance point is really important. If you think about the regulatory and compliance requirements that are there these days for any advisor to be able to do their job, and the complexity that is there, it's huge, and it's getting bigger every day, particularly for people that are having to manage a cross-border. They're having to look at different cross-border manuals to work out what level of advice they can give to what customer in what jurisdiction. They're having to understand the regulatory position in those markets. They're having to stay on top of changes in those regulatory positions, etc. And so the opportunity for AI to help people as in RMs become or stay compliant, and for it to be a quicker and easier process for both the relationship manager and the client is really important. And I think AI will play a big role going forward in helping and facilitating that journey for the RM to make sure that they have their KYC in place, that they've done their due diligence, that they're keeping on top of the regulations and the rules. But also, it's an opportunity, I think, for that process, that compliance process, to be firmly embedded into the relationship process rather than it being standalone. And I think AI can really help in that space as well.
Alex, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I clearly don't envy anyone that has to read cross-border manuals and try to figure out what they can and cannot do vis-a-vis their clients. I think that's and I think it's one of these areas in financial services that I think, because of a few bad experiences, has attracted a lot of attention. I know I'm German, so in Germany there are now rules around how you document the advice you give as a financial advisor, what kind of advice you can dispense, and it's all being motivated by there being a few cases of banks, branches, managers, RMs dispensing bad advice, or like biased advice. I think it's probably the best way of calling it. And I think that's something that is becoming a lot more difficult to handle. And I think there are clearly increasingly complicated and complex compliance requirements. And I think if financial institutions have a way to satisfy them slightly more easily and slightly more straightforwardly, I think everybody would love that, because nobody becomes a relationship manager to read the cross-border manual.
I think that's something that struck me when I first started using Marvin Labs, the platform, that its ability to weed out that kind of level of detail, particularly in changes or compliance issues that have been flagged in earnings reports, earnings releases, or changes. Is that something that was always at the heart of your thinking around the inception of Marvin Labs? The ability to be able to help solve that kind of problem?
Yeah, so I mean, from what we are looking at, right? I mean, like if you think through a lot of corporate reporting, a lot of corporate reporting is legally driven nowadays, right? You can't, for understandable and sometimes not so understandable reasons, there's a lot of standard disclosures that you need to make, and a lot of these standard disclosures are incredibly dull and incredibly uninformative because somebody has figured out that you can just hide stuff in 20 pages of risk factors, and that you need to make risk factor disclosures. Nobody is ever going to read them other than the regulator or some law firm if they're going to sue you. You will never hit the right risk factors for whatever you're doing wrong. And every corporate does something wrong eventually. But you can still hide a lot of stuff. So what we kind of, one of the fundamental things that we looked at initially is like, there is no reason why an annual report needs to be 200 pages. No company is this interesting and has this much stuff going on that you can fill 200 pages with riveting discussion and amazing insights, right? A lot of the 200 pages is risk factors, disclosures, definitions, and stuff that doesn't really change over time. So we very early on had this approach. Let's figure out what this is, and let's ignore it, and help our users ignore it, and help our users find the % or 2 or 5 in an annual report that actually matters, that changes over time, that is interesting, that they need to pay attention to, rather than getting bogged down and reading 150, 200 pages of risk factors and falling asleep doing that, quite frankly.
Yeah, I know, John, you're a man who's very close to the detail and certainly never fallen asleep during reading risk factors. But what's your thought on how AI, when you think back to the roles you've done, how it could help you navigate, the complexity of regulations and transparency? Because Alex raises a very good point that it's just a sheer level of coverage you would need in terms of not coverage of companies, but just coverage of time to go into all of this and work it out. You've been a COO in the banking space. You have got sometimes that accountability to do that. How do you tackle that?
Well, I mean, I've got to say, if there's an AI application that can support COOs to cover all of their responsibilities, then I'm all for that as a starter. Look, I mean, the reality is that the breadth of responsibilities in those kind of roles and the depth that you need to go into in order to cover your regulatory responsibilities, if nothing else, is very significant. So anything that can be done to streamline that, to allow yourself and your teams to focus on what really matters, which is where the risk is. Yeah, and to really pinpoint to the risk in a given situation is critical, and that's something that any COO will tell you is what they're focused on doing. However, to the same point that Alex made about company reporting, that's the same in these organizations in terms of they produce a lot of papers. They produce a lot of documentation. They produce a lot of processes. Now, a lot of that is really important, and some of it is less so. And the secret is how you can really distill that and understand where the risk is and manage the risks. So if an AI can help you to do that, then I'm all ears.
Yeah, I think there is I mean, certainly for people that come into the bank more on the junior side, starting their career, there is I think like a big perception that you're just creating lots of paper, you covering yourself in ways beyond imaginable, and you're doing all of that, and you're losing kind of the what's the saying, the forest for the trees, or the other way around?
It's in the wood for the tree, I think it is, isn't it?
Yeah. So you're losing yourself in a lot of low value add reporting requirements, low value add compliance requirements, and you're not seeing the big risks because the big risks, it's just another checkbox that you need to hit somewhere. And I think in particular, if you're coming into these organizations a bit more rose-eyed, you're kind of with rose-tinted glasses. I'm getting my metaphors mixed up. You're kind of easily delusioned by the amount of just boxes you have to tick, and then it's very easy to mix the box that you need to tick that actually matters. And I think it's always been our approach to reduce this noise and to kind of figure out what's relevant. I ideally hope for John that eventually somebody will turn around and do this for a CEO, because it is clearly a case, right? I mean, it's clearly a case where you have lots of internal compliance requirements. Clearly a case where you have a lot of private reporting requirements, either to a regulator or to one of the 5 regulators you have to satisfy. Well, as an organization as like HSBC, probably 5 is not even the right amount of regulators, right? You have to satisfy 100 regulators in 80 different jurisdictions, plus some global ones, and just the amount of paper you need to create is like it's crazy, and I really hope that there's something that allows CEO organizations to remain focused on the key risk factors.
I think John does as well. He's hoping for that. Just a comment from Luca Zaccagnino, if I've said that right. Humans not only have bias, but also dispersion. Machines typically exhibit consistent bias. You could learn with a client is almost lost. Some regulatory norms, sorry, somebody else's question. Yet we're more inherently biased towards forgiving human errors. We often see human errors as part of the complexity of the judgment experience. Machine errors generally trigger a crisis of trust in the tool. I think that's a really interesting perception there. Alex, what's your thought on that one? Because that's a really interesting point.
So I have 2 thoughts. So one of them, I wholeheartedly agree with Luca, right? There is kind of a different scale in measuring errors that the AI model does, or that the machine model does, the computer model does, compared to errors that a human does, right? If a human makes an error that's, they're tired, they didn't pay enough attention, it happens, it's unavoidable, it's lack of training, whatever. But it's not so dramatic. If the machine spits out the wrong result, it's catastrophic. And there's certainly different scale, and I kind of appreciate why this is, but I think it's slightly unfair for the machines, and I think it's inhibiting a lot of circumstances where you'd benefit from even having a slightly faulty machine than using humans. So the analogy I always have is, right, if you're looking at any profession, but if you look at an investment analyst or a trader, right, your best trader on their best day is going to outperform any AI model. But your best trader doesn't have their best day always, and not all of your traders are your best traders. And what AI can clearly do is AI outperforms, and I'm a whole believer of that. AI outperforms a good trader on a good day, or a good analyst on a good day. Not your superstar on their best day, when they slept for 8 hours, went to the gym in the morning, had their tea, are sharp and very happy. But they'll outperform the guy or the girl after a night out in the pubs, or on a Friday afternoon when they hit the pub over lunchtime. And really, that's what you need to do. I think that's one perspective, and the other perspective is really like how should you think about co-pilots? So basically combinations between humans and computers versus doing it just as a human or just as a computer. And so there is this very interesting experiment from chess where they have, well, the computers are so much better than humans nowadays, where they had this concept of centaur chess, which is you play a computer together with a human versus just a computer. And kind of the very interesting result that they have now is that the computers by themselves outperform the human plus the computer, because the human will guide the computer into making mistakes. I think there's a very similar example happening in medicine right now. If you look at people looking at CT scans, where the computer itself outperforms a human plus computer, and that outperforms the human standalone. So I think there are situations where you're seeing the human dragging down system performance. I don't think we're there in investment space. I also don't think we're going to be there for the next 20 years. But quite frankly, if you asked me 10 years ago if computers are better at chess, at math, at a lot of more constrained games than humans, I probably would have been more skeptical than the absolute carnage a computer does to a human when they play chess against them.
I think certainly when I play it does. John, what's your thoughts?
I was smiling all through that. I mean, firstly, I think it's great that we've got to a position where we feel sorry for the computer. So I wasn't expecting to come away with that emotion, but it's nice to know that we can feel that way. Look, I mean, I think on an intellectual level, I agree with everything that Alex said, right? I mean, I think you will be in a position, if you're not already, then very soon, where that is absolutely the case, that the AI in its purest form is going to be more accurate than the human being in almost all situations. I guess what I was pondering as I was listening to it, though, was that works again in isolation if you take humans out of the picture. Now, the problem that is logical if you're saying, okay, you're taking the advisor out of the picture because the advisor is diverting the AI from its true course, and that's detrimental to the client in Alex's sort of explanation there. The problem with that is that the client is also a human being, and therefore you're not removing the human being and the human emotion from that relationship, because by its nature, unless you're going to have a computer talking to a computer, there is a human there that is going through emotions and experiencing emotions. So I think that the true test is going to be, how will that perform during a down cycle in the market or high volatility? Yeah, will the fact that you don't have a human being interacting with the client, will that mean actually that clients jump out of the market when they get scared, when really they should be staying in the market and riding out the storm? What other reactions will a human being have when they're dealing with a computer that perhaps another human being would have helped them to stay the course? I don't know. I mean, it's a fascinating topic, and I think time will tell in terms of how that mix should work for it to be the best that it can be for people to get the right results at the end of it.
I think one of the very interesting stats that is coming out of behavioral finance is that it's a thing you wouldn't expect. I think is that humans tend to overtrade and destroy performance with that. And I think that's such a fascinating result, because I think if you were to ask, anyone without knowing this background, whether that's the case or not, you'd like your naive viewers, right? The computer transaction costs are so much smaller. It's always switched on. It always has attention. So they should trade more, right? Just because they can. They can observe the markets for 24 hours, 7 hours a day. They don't need to sleep. They don't need to eat. They don't need to do anything else. And the funny result is that the humans overtrade because they have the fear they get greedy, and that's very interesting. And I think, I mean, John, I wholeheartedly agree with your point, right? I mean, you'll still have the human, because you're dispensing advice to a human. You will still have, until we live in a world where everything is a hologram and we have text-to-speech synchronization and everything. We'll still have a human in the loop at the end. Not the least of which because there's so much stuff that comes out of a financial advisor relationship that is not just investment advice.
With that thought in mind, we're just in the last 5 minutes. It'd be good just to get both of you your final thoughts on this topic, particularly as well. Thank you to those people who put comments in. I know Yash Sharma, you've been answering some of the questions as well in the comments, so thanks for engaging with that. But John, what are your sort of final thoughts? And then Alex, I'll come to you.
So firstly, I've really enjoyed the conversation, so thank you for having me again. Look, I mean, I think AI is here to stay. It's already everywhere. And every time I open an application now, there's an AI that you can see, across the menu bar or wherever. So it's here and it's here to stay. I think not offering AI as a part of the solution for clients is not going to be justifiable in the future. And you're going to be in a situation where banks or financial institutions that don't have AI supporting advisors, it's going to be like 15 years ago saying that you only have fax, you don't have email. You're not going to be able to attract the best talent because people are simply going to expect that that's there, and clients are probably going to expect that it's there as part of the proposition. So I think it's there to stay. I think there's some proof points that need to be delivered, and I think that will happen over time, and it has the potential to really radically change the industry, and I think change the industry for the better if done in the right way. So I'm very positive about the future. I'm certainly not one of the doom mongers around AI and what that means. I think it will enhance the industry if done right, and I'm sure it will be done right.
Yeah. Alex, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I share the view. It's one of the things I mentioned, and I'll kind of use my closing words to mention that I think the best kind of AI doesn't look like what we think AI look like today, right? It's not the best kind of AI application for any organization is the one that you don't see. It's not the chatbot. It's the AI that is creating your report. It's creating your tailored advice, your tailorized advice. It's running your risk models. So I think in a lot of instances, the best kind of AI is the one you don't see. But yeah, it's going to be the reality that we are going to have to, that we all are fortunate to live in.
Fortunate to live in. Well, on that note, I think I thank you both for being part of this conversation today. We just had a couple of final observations in from Leo Abraham, who said humans are in the loop also to reassure the client as well as the institution, which I think is a good point, Leo. And also he's added, we need to ensure that bias is considered at the outset, especially unconscious and unknown bias, which I think has come up several times on some of these discussions that we've had. But thank you, John. Thank you, Alex, for taking part in this discussion. As you can see, it's been lively. There's been lots of discussion. We hope the audience have found it very valuable as well. So whether you are looking at this topic through rose-tinted glasses, can't see the wood for the trees, or have found the Holy Grail, or indeed are heading to the pub after this, we wish you well and thank you for participating in this. And stay tuned for the upcoming episodes over the next few months.
Thank you so much. Thanks, James.
Thank you.
And thanks, John, for being a guest here.
My pleasure. Thank you.